Hello and welcome. This is the weekend program of Into Vietnam, broadcast on VITV. Stay tuned for the comprehensive view of Vietnam's economy in the week from June the 30th to July the 6th. Top stories of the week. Vietnam gross domestic product growth hit 5.7 to 5.8% in 2014. Standard & Poor's raised Vietnam for its stability. And the IFC urges Vietnam to improve its business management capacities. First of all, let us review the most notable figures of the week. In its report on economic development in the first half of the year, the National Financial Supervisory Commission said Vietnam's economy expanded by 5.2% in the period versus 4.9% in the corresponding period of 2013. The Commission estimated the growth would be 5.7 to 5.8% by the end of this year, excluding the impacts of rising tensions in the EC. The report also said, with a rise of 4.98%, the CPI will continue to be controlled at no more than 5% in the first months of this year. Considering the well-kept inflation, the FSSC recommended the final half of 2014, the government policy should prioritize measures to boost gross domestic demand to fuel economic growth target of 5.8%. The government is also suggested to enhance the state budget disbursement to ensure social investment amount for development, tighten state revenues and prevent tax frauds. It should also speed up bad debt clearance and make appropriate adjustment to interest rate, striving to achieve credit growth target of 12 to 14%. According to updated data from the State Bank of Vietnam, the non-performing loan ratio of credit institution system was 4.03% of total loans at the end of April 2014. The figure was increased significantly compared with 3.86% at the end of March and is about 4% for the first time since the beginning of the year. With total outstanding loans at the end of April were 3.5 trillion dong. Bad debts in the system were about 142.16 billion dong. At the end of March, NPLs were at 133.69 billion dong, with total loan of 3.44 trillion dong. Thus, within 1 month, the absolute number of bad debts has climbed by more than 9,470 billion dong. However, the NPL figures above are reported to the Central Bank by credit institutions. In early April, the State Bank Governor Nguyễn Văn Bình said, the Central Bank assessed that bad debt currently account for about 70% or nearly 247 trillion dong. According to Mr. Nguyễn Quốc Hưng, chairman of Vietnam Asset Management Company's member council, in the first 6 months of the year, the company has bought original debts worth 11.4 trillion dong. Since the first debt purchase on October 2013, VMC has bought 50.7 trillion dong debts from credit institutions. So far, the company has sold and recovered 996 billion dong of debts. Besides, the company has restructured 9.07 trillion dong debts for 112 customers. In 2014, the VMC aims to sell and recover 2.5 trillion dong of debts. Despite many obstacles, Mr. Hung is confident that the target can be achieved. So far, VMC has built sales list of 10 collectors totaling 7.8 trillion dong. Currently, the company continues to complete the specification of the projects to present to investors, and some investors have shown interest in buying them. Coming up next in the program is major macroeconomic and investment news.
Standard & Poor's affirms its BB- long-term and B short-term sovereign credit ratings on Vietnam recently, with the outlook on the long-term rating being stable. The rating agency said that although the stabilization measures undertaken over the past 2 years have dampened growth, they have also restored macroeconomic stability, resulting in relatively low and stable inflation, higher confidence in the local currency, and a much improved external liquidity. It says that Vietnam's growth potential is robust given an export manufacturing sector that is well diversified and increasingly oriented toward higher value-added goods, a rising share of services and manufacturing in economic output, and the growth of the private sector. The stable outlook on the ratings reflects S&P's expectation that over the next 12 to 18 months, Vietnam's policy stance will ensure macroeconomic stability, cementing the economic improvements and gains in policy credibility. According to the information from the State Bank of Vietnam, by the end of June 2014, credit growth reached 2.3%. Compared to the first 5 months of 2014, credit in June grew by about 1%. As of June the 25th, total means of payment and capital mobilization was up 6%. Notably, foreign currency credit showed signs of increase. An indicator of medium and long-term credit also grew 4%. Banks have gradually recovered and invested more in fixed assets. Although credit has edged up, in the past 6 months, cash flow from commercial banks concentrated 87% to 90% in government bonds and treasury bills, with credit growth target of 12% in 2014 and actual growth of 2.3% in the first 6 months. It is still a long way to achieve the year's target.
In its macroeconomic report published on July the 2nd, the HSBC forecast Vietnam GDP growth rate would be 5.5% this year and 5.8% in 2015, lower than the forecast it made earlier due to sluggish domestic demand. In early June, the HSBC forecast Vietnam GDP growth this year was 5.6%. However, it said the country growth rate would be lower than the set target due to the decreasing consumer confidence, although it reaffirmed production and export would stay in the spotlight and would promote the economic growth in the second half of 2014. The company believed that households and businesses would curb on spending and investment unless they see clearer signs of reforms. In the report, it said Vietnam needed a flexible capital market to get rid of lower middle income trap. It expected Vietnam average GDP per capita would grow slowly and only double the current figure to $4,000 in 2020. In addition, it said inflation was expected to rise slightly in the third quarter, up from 5% on year, as energy prices and social services costs might increase. The HSBC Manufacturing Purchasing Manager Index was 52.3 in June, compared with 52.5 in May. A reading above 50 indicates expansions, while below indicates contraction. Meanwhile, the government's Industrial Production Index for June rose by 6.1% on year. The HSBC said weight rules imposed on trucks continue to disrupt operation, leading to increased input prices and delivery delays. The company expected that low inventories and robust new orders would help the sector to continue to perform well, especially as the impact from the recent tension fade. According to the General Statistics Office, the total retail sales of goods and services in the first half of this year were estimated at $68.5 billion, up 10.7% over the same period last year. However, excluding inflation, the growth was only 5.7%, just equivalent to the rate of the 5-month period and lower than the 4-month period 6% that was showing signs of leveling off. Retail sales, which contributed 3/4 of the total value, rose by 12.2%, the lowest level among 4 components, including accommodation and restaurant, retail sales, consumption, and tourism services. The tourism service posted the highest increasing rate of 20.5%. Even 5 years after the financial crisis, consumers still tightly control spending, with the purchasing power leveling off in the first 6 months of the year. The GSO said the economic difficulty still had its impacts on employment, incomes, and spending of consumers.
Ho Chi Minh City's economy has rebounded and grown steadily with high growth rates in gross domestic product, budget collection and foreign investment attraction in the first half of this year. These important results created a solid foundation for the city to fulfill socio-economic development targets for 2014. The city made significant achievements in the first 6 months, with GDP grossing 379 trillion dong, up 8.2% over the same period last year, budget collection fetching 122 trillion dong, up 14.9%, industrial production index rising 5.6%, and total retail goods and services turnover expanding 12.8% to 312 trillion dong. The retail index demonstrates the uptick in the consumption trend, contributing to raising accurate demand for the economy. The city's exports were estimated at $14.2 billion, a year-on-year increase of 5.7%, while imports fell 2.2% to $12.4 billion. Its trade surplus has helped improve the country's trade balance. The June's Consumer Price Index or CPI inched up modestly by 0.58% compared to the previous month. Low CPI and abundant goods and services demonstrate that the city has well implemented measures to contain inflation and ensure the market law of supply and demand. By June the 21st, the city had granted licenses to 169 new projects capitalized at $967 million and approved another 53 operational projects, registering to increase their capital by $110 million. Overall total investment capitalization grew by 202% to $1.08 billion.
Several Vietnamese goods have gained a firm foothold in the domestic market, with 70% of Vietnamese consumers putting their trust in local goods. Data from the Ministry of Industry and Trade showed that 80% of Vietnamese people are keen on garment, textile and shoes, while 58% were keen on food items and fruit. In several supermarkets run by domestic enterprises, locally made products accounted for 80 to 90% of the total. More than 90% of goods at over 9,000 stabilization shops were domestic products. A recent survey of the ministry also revealed the localization rate of import products and materials, as well as equipment, rose 25% since the Vietnamese People Use Vietnamese Goods campaign was launched. Now the foreign trade news, we continue the program.
China is expected to remain the biggest exporter to Vietnam in the first 6 months of 2014, as Vietnam is likely to spend $20.4 billion buying goods from China during the first half of the year, up 21.1% year-on-year. During the 6-month period, import revenue from China is projected to account for 29.31% of Vietnam's total import revenue. Imported items from China with highest growth during the period include machinery, up 30.3% year-on-year, steel up 35.5% year-on-year, fabric up 25.6% year-on-year, and phones up 11.3% year-on-year. In 2013, China was the biggest market among exporters to Vietnam. According to the General Statistics Office, Vietnam imported $36.8 billion while exporting some $13.1 billion worth of products to China in 2013. Vietnam exported an estimated 4.69 million tons, or 190,000 barrels per day, of crude oil in the first 6 months of 2014, a rise of 9% from a year ago. The General Statistics Office said in its monthly report that crude oil exports will generate $4.07 billion in the January-June period, up 10.8% from the same period last year. Oil product imports in the same period rose 15.1% to an estimated 4.34 million tons. Vietnam also imported an estimated 400,000 tons of liquefied petroleum gas in the first 6 months, up 29.6% from 2015. Secondary steel importers in Vietnam are pleading with relevant management bodies to help because a newly issued regulation on import steel quality is driving them to bankruptcy. Under the Joint Circular No. 44/2013 issued by the Ministry of Industry and Trade and the Ministry of Science and Technology that provide the management of domestically produced and imported steel quality, secondary steel importers in Vietnam have to announce the applying standards for goods in import contracts for customs clearance instead of only the origin of products and import contracts as done earlier. Domestic importers say they cannot meet the regulations, which have come into force from June 1, 2014. They say that since secondary steel is mainly imported in small batches from numerous suppliers, there can be no unified standard for evaluation. Most of the secondary steel is imported from the EU, Japan, Australia, South Korea, and the US, so it's of good quality and even better than up-to-standard steel imported from China.
Vietnamese firms are said to be outplayed right in their own playfield and losing important advantages over foreign counterparts. One of the root causes of the situation is ineffective business management skills and ability in local firms. Therefore, the International Finance Corporation urged Vietnam to improve its governance skills to improve the competitiveness. More in the business talk. Mr. Philip Armstrong, it's a great pleasure to have you here with us on VITV channel. As you know, Vietnam has made a lot of efforts in developing corporate governance, but the capacity has been really limited. What are the reasons for this?
I think the first and foremost is, Vietnam has only been in the market economy for a very short period of time. So a lot of the legal traditions, a lot of the sort of governance practices and things like that are still things that have been mastered in the sort of more developed or more advanced economies over the last 100 and 150 years, whereas Vietnam's only been in the economy for a short time, and it has to absorb a huge amount. If you think of the progression we've made from the early 1900s to where we are.
What do you think are the key challenges to improving corporate governance in Vietnam at the moment?
There's a couple of areas you can probably identify. One is board professionalism, the need to have directors who really understand their role as a director of a company as distinct from being a manager or a government official or something like that, and understanding the complexities of being a director of a company and how they should conduct themselves in that role as distinct from the other roles that they may have other than being a director. Because an effective board of directors will lead to an effective company and then will lead to a more stronger economy and more attraction for investors. The second one, of course, goes hand in hand, and that's the whole concerns around state-owned enterprises. State-owned enterprises are such an important part of the economy and also a very large part of the stock exchange listings. It's an area that is of concern both to international as well as domestic investors. I think it's an area that needs to be possibly strengthened and reviewed. Third one would probably be the regulators themselves. Vietnam has the laws, or even though some of the laws might be a bit out of date, but the laws are there. The real challenge is the enforcement of those laws on a consistent basis. In other words, that it's applied equally to all companies, to all directors. The second one is providing more clarification in the market as to how they interpret the laws that they enforce. And the third one is for the regulators to get more independence in how they exercise their judgment.
You have mentioned a very key issue, that is state-owned enterprises. They account for a big part of the economy, but they have a big problem with corporate governance. What can be done to improve the business management within this kind of sector?
One of the big problems you have in the state sector, particularly in a transition economy like Vietnam, is retaining talent. So very talented people tend to go to the private sector because there's more money there, very often there's more prestige there. The second one is probably looking at the processes and structures under which the state-owned companies operate, and to encourage as best as they can more independent and professional directors, which might mean bringing in some directors who are established in the private sector. It might even mean bringing in some foreign directors to sit on state-owned companies.
IFC report showed that Vietnam is lagging behind other regional countries in terms of corporate governance, and what should be done from relevant sides to improve this issue?
Well, I think the corporate governance is a lot about trust. Corporate governance is fundamentally accountability and transparency. Accountability, that you have a board of directors that recognises its responsibilities to management and to the shareholders and to the communities in which the company operates. So, and they are transparent about the challenges and decisions they make, or the challenges they face and the decisions they make. And an investor then gets a better view of one of the people who run the company. They can trust them, and then of the results, which must have a high level of integrity, so they know they can rely when they receive a financial report from the company, and they know it's reliable. They know they can place an investment decision against that because information has integrity. Those are the key issues.
And thank you so much for joining our program today.
Thank you very much.
Credit in foreign currency have showed a strong rising trend in the first half of 2014, with the disbursement rate up 10%, 5 times as much as the average credit growth of the whole banking system. The lending over deposit rate in foreign currencies ratio is very close to the 100% level. This demonstrates that foreign currency credit is on the rise in recent months. Gia Định Footwear Company exports shoes. Is making bank loans in US dollars with a rate of 3% in 6 months. Mr. Nguyễn Chí Trung, director of the company, said he does not want to borrow in Vietnam dong, as the rate is much higher than in foreign currencies. The big gap prompted firms to choose a more profitable ones in the current tough conditions.
Về mặt các đơn vị làm xuất khẩu có cái điều kiện mà thu cái ngoại tệ từ nước ngoài chuyển trả về thì họ sẽ chuyển sang vay bằng USD là thuận lợi hơn và đồng thời là có lợi hơn về mặt kinh tế, bởi vì cái lãi suất trung bình của Việt Nam đồng hiện nay các doanh nghiệp phải vay, thì kể cả những doanh nghiệp phải vay xuất khẩu thì nó cũng phải trung bình từ 5,5% ưu đãi cho tới 8 đến 10%. Thì so sánh hai cái việc đó với cái điều kiện đồng USD luôn luôn được ổn định thì người ta cho rằng vay USD là có hiệu quả hơn tất cả.
Aware of the trend, banks have posted foreign currency lending with attractive rates of 3 to 6%. This has pushed up loans in US dollars in the first half of 2014. Banks have also maintained their foreign funds to boost lending through the end of the year.
Nguồn đô cho vay, lãi suất cho vay đô tương đối hấp dẫn so với tiền đồng, thấp hơn tầm khoảng 4 tới 5% so với tiền đồng. Vì vậy, doanh nghiệp sẽ lựa chọn vay đô, mặc dù có thể tỷ giá có thể biến động lên 1%, nhưng mà cái việc vay đô của doanh nghiệp nó vẫn hấp dẫn hơn so với tiền đồng hiện tại. Chắc chắn là nhu cầu vay đô doanh nghiệp sẽ tăng cao trong thời gian tới. Do là hiện tại là tình hình xuất khẩu rất là khả quan, cộng với cái nguồn huy động đô của ngân hàng vào thì giá tương đối hấp dẫn. Nên vì vậy nên đầu ra cho doanh nghiệp thì tương đối tốt so với tiền đồng hiện tại. Nên việc tăng trưởng đô từ đây tới cuối năm là rất là tốt.
Foreign currency loans are classified as preferential loans, as Vietnam still try to boost export to meet the huge demand for production materials. Although the Vietnam dong US dollars exchange rate was adjusted up by 1%, the move does not dampen the foreign currency credit, which is expected to maintain its rising trend this year.
Cái nhu cầu vay ngoại tệ mà vay cụ thể là vay đô la của các doanh nghiệp ấy thì nó phụ thuộc vào rất nhiều cái yếu tố. Tỷ giá là một cái yếu tố, nhưng mà quan trọng là vấn đề là các cái doanh nghiệp có nhu cầu nhập khẩu nhiều hay không. Thì cho nên là nếu có nhu cầu nhập khẩu nhiều thì các doanh nghiệp sẽ có cái nhu cầu về ngoại tệ, về đô la nhiều. Và trong khi đó là cái tỷ giá mà chúng ta vẫn giữ ổn định cái lãi suất vay bằng đô la vẫn thấp thì đương nhiên là các cái doanh nghiệp người ta vẫn có cái nhu cầu vay bằng đô la hơn là vay bằng đồng Việt Nam.
Foreign currency credits have been boosted in the first half with a disbursement rate of roughly 10%, contrary to the falling trend 3 years earlier. However, in the long run, the financial market should be stabilized better to avoid pressure on liquidity and on the exchange rate. As usual, the final part is a summary of the local securities market between June the 30th and July the 4th. And that's all for now. Thank you so much for your attention. For comments and feedback, you can reach us via email at intovietnam@vitv.vn or give us a call at 0422208288. Goodbye and see you later.